What's going on there, guys? So for you American football fans, today we're going to be turning this picture taken by Keith Johnson of this offense into a 3D animation, all from using Photomotion Horizon. Let's get into Photoshop and let's begin taking apart this image. We'll first want to create a duplicate from our background just over here so that we have something to work with. We'll then use the quick selection tool, of course, and start creating a rough outline of our main subject. And once we've got that rough outline, we're then going to start fine-tuning our edges by just going over to select a mask just at the very top over here. Now at this point we do need to be quite meticulous, so try not to rush this process, as the better our mask is, the better our final animation will look. Remember, there are still a whole host of tools to help you with this, so you're not just limited in terms of options, and again, slow and steady really does win the race. Once we're finished with creating our selection, let's just go over to here over on output and change this option to new layer with mask, and then hit OK. We'll then make sure to select our mask from the layer that we've just made, and then we'll disable it. We'll then enable and select layer 1 just over here and look at expanding our mask just by going over to select, then modify and expand. We'll then expand this mask to roughly around 15 pixels. So what we'll do here is fill in this area of our image using content aware fill. There will still be some work to do after we use this fill, but most of the work will be done for us. So this isn't too bad. Obviously we'll need to fix the stands and this person, so let's do that now by just going over to the patch tool over here. And what we essentially need to do is just remove all of these anomalies and fix the background of the image so it looks as clean as possible. We'll also have to rebuild parts of this image, obviously, as these stands are looking, well, not great. You can of course use other tools within Photoshop like clone stamp. Just make sure to take the time and focus on getting the best result that you can. So once we're happy with our work, it's time to focus on the second layer. Let's get back to our selection tool, and what we want to do is just select this defender over here. Doesn't matter too much if he's off screen slightly, as he will also be out of frame within our animation. So once we're happy with this, we'll once again go to select a mask and refine our edges. So we'll need to be as detailed as possible with our selection, as obviously the better our selection is, the more authentic our animation looks. So let's zoom in onto the helmet grate just over here and clear up some of these gaps between the shield and the background. Again, take your time, no need to rush, and try and get the best result as possible. We'll just go and tidy these parts up, like the shoulders, the arms, and these legs as well, just to make sure it's as perfect as possible. Again, we'll also need to make sure that our output here is set to new layer with mask, and then we'll hit OK. Right, so the same here again. Let's select our mask from this new layer and then disable said layer. We'll then select layer 1, this one just over here, and proceed to expand this mask. Again, around about 15 pixels should be fine. And finally, we'll use content aware to tell Photoshop what is exactly behind this defender. Well, to be honest, this time it's worked out spot on, so really no need to use any other tool to tweak this image further. So let's get to renaming our layers here so we don't get too confused in After Effects about what exactly goes where. So the first layer will be the one that's closest to us, so that's this defender just over here. And of course the second player on the offensive will be layer 2, with this background obviously being the clean plate. Of course, don't forget to save your work and keep this file in a convenient place where there's really not too much going on, and that's the Photoshop part of this tutorial over. Okay, so on to Photomotion Horizon now. So give After Effects a minute or two to load up first, and as most of you know, Photomotion is a viewport based application, so most of our work will be done in the viewport and the effect controls. So let's just double click on this Start Horizon to get to the main dashboard, and once we're there, there's really nothing that we can actually do but just click on this Add Photo button. So once we're in Add Photo, we'll need to add our Photoshop layers into our project. So when we do so, just make sure that our import kind is set to composition, and we should see all of our layers here in a separate folder within the project window. So let's drag our clean plate just over here into this composition and parent it to this layer above while holding shift. We'll then scale this layer up from the parent layer so it fits our composition and we can't see any gaps around the top or bottom edges. Okay, so let's come out of that, go to the main dashboard. You can see now that our cage options have become available to us. Ignore them for now, as we'll need to import our layer 1 into the project. So let's get to that now by double clicking on layer 1 just over here on the main dashboard. Now, since we've already done our masking in Photoshop, we really don't need to draw any masks here, just simply import layer 1. So once we're in here, we'll just drag and drop our layer 1 in by dragging and dropping into our composition, then parenting this layer to this null while holding shift, and that will copy over the attributes from our background over to this layer. So before we go any further, let's think about where exactly we want to put our main subject. If we place him in layer 3, we have the opportunity to place text layers or anything else within layer 2 and 4, adding some extra depth to our image if we wanted to do so. So with that, let's go into layer 3 and import this layer 2, which we created earlier in Photoshop, and much like before, just parent it to this layer on top. Okay, so back at the main dashboard with our Photoshop layers set up, let's look at adapting our cage for our subjects. So first, let's expand the edges, then we'll scale it proportionately, and maybe changing the positioning slightly using the central controller within the cage. We can also add some floor rotation by just clicking on this bottom floor panel, then going to Effect Controls and bring this rotation to around 100, which rotates our floor so it's nearly 90 degrees from its original position. And now with our main subject standing on the floor plate, he's now anchored to that position. So our dashboard is kind of getting in the way of us seeing exactly what's happening with this cage. But we can actually push these buttons to the back of this cage by just clicking on the other button just over here and then checking the checkbox under Fade Buttons in Effect Controls. Awesome, now we can see the cage a little bit better and see exactly what we need to do in order to make this floor plate fit a little bit better. Once we're happy, we can go back to Other and untick this Fade Buttons back in Effect Controls, which will bring our dashboard options back to the forefront. We can then click on this Animate button just over here, and after selecting it, we can then go to Effect Controls and click this checkbox to enable all of our settings for animating our project. So first things first, let's get rid of all these white edges by going over and changing the aspect ratio, and we can do that by clicking on this resolution button just over here, and then in Effect Controls, we can change this default to portrait. As you can see, we still have these white gaps here, which tells us that we need to scale up our image further in order to make sure it fits our animation. We can do this by going back to the Add Photo composition where we placed our clean plate and fiddling with the scale and positioning so it fits within our main dashboard window. So with our layers fit rather quite nicely within our project, let's start to think about creating our animation. So let's look at adding some zoom into our animation by clicking this icon on our controller. We'll then go into Effect Controls and drag this zoom slider up closer into our animation. Let's also move our controller around here. We can also control the amount of height we want within our animation by clicking on this part of the controller here and dragging the up and down slider and maybe changing the multiplier too. If we click on this icon over here, we can also change the tilt by just going over to Effect Controls and tweaking both of these sliders to get our intended effect. So once we're happy, let's look at adding some particles into our animation by going over to Settings on the main dashboard and then checking this Activate Particles button and then changing the particles for something a little bit more suitable, like maybe number 11, this range just over here. Okay, awesome, so it's looking great. Let's preview how it looks so far. As you can see here, these particles are also moving within your scene too, so in case you didn't know, they are actually fully dynamic. Okay, so we can still add in another layer by maybe placing some text in between the clean plate and our main subject. So let's go to layer 4 and jump straight into import, and then right click here, then select new, and then text. We'll then type out Bradley Phillips just over here, and then set up our typography. We'll then change it slightly by using the transform effect and adding some skew here and changing the angle. Okay, great. So let's go back to the animation and see how it looks. Not bad. Let's change our animation so it runs around about 5 seconds long instead of where we have it at the moment. We can do that by placing our needle to the 5 seconds point, selecting all of these keyframes just over here and dragging them to the needle while holding shift, which will snap those keyframes to the marker. We'll also hit N on our keyboard to mark out our working area. If you are choosing a different point, that's absolutely fine, but just make sure to keep a note of it somewhere for the next couple of steps. Okay, great. Let's make this look even more dynamic by adding some further animations to make it seem like these people are moving in place. Okay, so let's go back into the Add Photo layer where we put our clean plate and animate the position of the background by just clicking on the stopwatch icon over here under the position. Just a quick note here, but make sure you're doing this for the Photoshop layer, not the null layer above. We'll then move our needle to the 5 second point, or as I said earlier, however long your animation is, and then we'll mark out the workspace. Finally, let's adjust the position slightly and change both our keyframes to Bezier by hitting F9 on the keyboard. Right, so if we leave things as they are, we will encounter a small problem with the dashboard like earlier where we were encountering some negative space. So let's go to the effects bar just over here and apply a repeat tile effect and just expand these settings in Effect Controls and change the tiling to unfold. Lovely, it looks a little bit more subtle now. So let's get back to the main dashboard and see what we're working with. Not bad. So let's go to layer 3 where our animation subject is, making sure that our time head is set to the very beginning and create some puppet points points around his head, body, shoulders, and legs. So like when we change the position, we'll go to the 5 seconds point, as that's the length of our animation within this example, and we'll mark out our working path. Okay, so let's expand our mesh under Puppet to see all of our Puppet points within that layer. Select all of these keyframes quickly and just change them to Bezier again just by hitting F9. And once we're done, let's start animating this guy out. We can do so by just making sure that our needle is now at the 5 seconds point at the end of our working path and moving all of these Puppet points to whereabouts we want to see some movement. We'll want our animation to seem natural, so take your time, and if you see something that doesn't look quite right, take a moment to tweak it. So let's go back to the main dashboard and see how it looks. Well, it looks okay, but we should really think about adding in some positioning as well. So let's get to that now. So let's get back to layer number 3, and again, making sure that we're selecting the Photoshop layer, not the null. Press P for the position, then click the stopwatch, and then maybe create a couple of keyframes, making sure they're Bezier. And once you're done, let's scan around and see how it looks. Absolutely grand. So once we're happy with this, we'll do exactly the same with the defending player over here within layer 1. So we'll repeat the process once again, and much like before, we'll want to add in these Puppet points and then move our marker to the 5 seconds point, mark out, and then change all of these keyframes to Bezier by hitting F9 on our keyboard, and then we'll just create a very simple animation here. If we look at our dashboard quickly, we can also tell that our defender here is actually cut off. So let's bear that in mind when we're animating his position. Once again, we don't want to change the actual position of the null layer. We'll leave that exactly the way it is, but the Photoshop layer itself is the one that we're adjusting. So press P on the keyboard, hit the stopwatch over here, and change his positioning ever so slightly. We'll also change the scale just to be on the safe side, and after, let's jump to the 5 seconds point and add that little bit of position change. So let's add some final movement to this text layer. So if you haven't used the transform effect, feel free to use the method that we've done beforehand. Click the stopwatch over here and then go to the 5 seconds mark and then do exactly what's been done previously. But if you've been following along, you'll notice that because we applied a transform skew effect earlier, if we move the position here, the text will move in a very strange diagonal direction. So just a quick heads up, if you've been using the transform effect, make sure to move it via using the positioning there, not the base position attributes on the layer itself. So once we've gotten the positioning animated within our text layer, let's check back with our main dashboard and see how it looks. So it's okay, really coming along now, but there is actually one small detail that we can change further to really add that immersion into our scene. What we're going to do now is essentially change our particles direction and add some animations to them. So let's go to the search bar in the project window and navigate to this animated 960 composition. Once we're in this composition, click the shy switch and let's unlock this composition main projection 960 layer and double click on it to get access to it. And once we're in, you probably won't see anything because these layers will be hidden by default. Again, just click the shy switch and all of these layers will reappear. Okay, great. What we essentially need to do is just go to these particle compositions just over here, depth 1 through 4, and then hit R to bring up the rotation. Now, because these actually exist within a 3D space, there are going to be quite a few attributes available for us to change, but for this, we just want the Z rotation, and we'll tweak it to around about -30 to give the impression that the rain is moving diagonally. However, because we've done that, our particles are going to be cut off within the frame. But thankfully, there's an easy fix for that, so let's apply the repeat tile here for all 4 layers and expand the top and bottom attributes for each one of them. So if that fixed, the next step is animating their position, and we can do that for all 4 layers at the same time by making sure they're all selected, pressing P for the positioning, and then adding keyframes to the very beginning, then moving it again to the 5 seconds point or to however long your animation is, then just dragging this y-axis down. Great, looking cool so far, but again we're running into the same problem that we had beforehand. Of course, this is an easy fix. Just use the repeat tile effect to expand each one of these layers up ever so slightly so it continues well off frame. And if we preview this animation now, we can really see those particles now moving, and it's brought so much more life to this animation. So let's think about adding our very final touch here, just adding a little bit of blur to our background and forefront. So if you click on the animation button just over here and then go down to this blur strength on the composition timeline, we can then create a keyframe here and changing it to something like, say for example, 22. We can then uncheck this lock focus on layer 1 and then click on the checkbox focus on layer 3. Lastly, let's actually enable the effect by checking the depth of field checkbox just over here. As you can see now, when we reach the end of our animation, we've got this really nice blur effect around our main subject. Of course, before we even think about exporting it, let's just make sure that our export resolution is actually set to 4K. We can do this by clicking again on the resolution button on the main dashboard, then going over to export resolution and effect controls and changing it to 4K. OK. And with everything in place, let's finally get to exporting this animation out by double clicking on this export button on the main dashboard. And as you can see, once we've reached the export page, Photomotion Perfect Cut system is giving us a green light for 0 loops. That's because our playhead is actually sitting on the 5 seconds mark, or 150 frames. If we wanted to, we could export more loops out by marking out at 300 frames, 600 frames, but 0 loops is probably fine for this animation. So as we're already sitting on the 5 seconds point where our last set of keyframes are, let's just hit N on our keyboard and then go to composition at the very top here and then click on add to render queue. We'll then click on this loose list just over here and change our format, so instead of AVI we're choosing QuickTime, which gives us a .mov file. Click OK and nothing left to do now but just hit render. Okay, cool, so there we have it, looking really immersive, which is fantastic. Let us know if you found this tutorial helpful, and please give us a shout through live chat if you run into any difficulties whatsoever. Until next time.